Hello, it's 101. I'm a little late today by a minute, but that's okay, I think, because nobody else is on yet, and most of you watch this later anyway. Anyway, it is Tuesday, time for a Tuesday breakdown, and there's a lot to say about where we're at in the book of Daniel, what happened on Sunday, where we're going, and I'm happy to be a part of that. So I hope you are as well, and I will try to respond to questions as they come in or make up some questions that I think other people might be interested in. It's a beautiful day, and let's just cut to the chase. Daniel chapter 3. This was a very, very difficult message for me, and in a way that I did not enjoy, in the sense that I wanted it to be easier. And the fact that it wasn't frustrated me, because it's not a hard story. It's a story we teach 3-year-olds in Sunday school class. It's a story I've known my entire life. They're Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They get sent into the fiery furnace. They don't die. They come out because they wouldn't bow down to this idol. Great. It's a great story. It's a great sermon about no compromise and never give the kingdoms of this world an inch. And if this were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have lost a wink of sleep over it. I would have gotten up right away and just been like, fight the power, stand up strong for the things of God, and come what may. The problem is we went through COVID. And it was during COVID that the world split. And the evangelical world split. And it was almost impossible to stay calm through it all, because everyone now had a perspective that we didn't have before, which is push has come to shove, or has it? There is a statue now. We have to fight, or is there? And this debate created a lot of havoc in a lot of churches, and even here at Grace, where whether it was vaccines or a mask, or should we be open or should we not be open, or how should we be open, or how many people should we let in? I mean, it was every day trying to thread that needle. And there was no position to be had on any of these issues as a pastor or as a church that didn't set somebody off. And I love how we navigated it here. I'm super proud of how Grace Church handled it. We didn't make everybody happy, but I think, I know I had a clear conscience going through. I think we made some mistakes, but there's no way you couldn't in that crazy time that we were in. And some churches and some pastors who saw that time as a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego time, they did not hold back. And as I was preparing the sermon, I thought, well, I could just be like those guys and just take out the scythe, the sword, and just level everything off and say, here's the line for all of you for every issue. And if you're not as upset as I am about this, or this, then you're bowing to the statue of secularism, or the statue of leftist political thinking, or the statue of right political thinking. You know, you're bowing to the idol of Trump, or you're not bowing to the God of whatever I think it is. And it's so chaotic right now. And it has been such a mess since the COVID stuff hit. And you could probably even go further back, but it made Daniel 3 terrifying to preach. I'll just say it. I made a crack about it, I think, first service. Like, I wish I was actually in like Daniel 9, which is all prophecy, because that would have been easier than something like this simple story applied to American evangelicalism in 2023. And threading that needle or handling this passage in the midst of all of these very, very strong opinions about what is a bridge too far that we should not bow to. I felt like preaching this sermon was like I'm on a unicycle on a tightrope juggling over a pit of fire. Like there's so many ways to make a wrong step. And I didn't sleep well Saturday night. I was prepared. I had the notes written. These were done by Wednesday. But I kept thinking, how do I thread this needle? How do I talk about it? How do I? And because I don't want to get the text wrong, right? Of first importance is not what's going on in the culture. It's not what went on yesterday. It's not what I might be afraid of. Of primary importance as a preacher is to get the text right. And to get the tone of the text right is part of that. Get the author's intent right. That's part of it. Get the history of it right. That's part of it. And, we're not pulling things out of context. We're not squeezing a story to fit a systematic theology. What does the text say? What does the text mean? That is job number one. And part of this text is, when forced to choose, obey God, not men, no matter what the consequences. That's part of Daniel 3. It has to be. So then it became, okay, well, there's going to be people in that room who are going to want me to say one thing about how that applies or another. And so I wrestled with, do I say the gender thing? I mean, where is that line? Because there are matters of conscience, even in Scripture, where one believer would say the line is food sacrificed to idols, for example, in 1 Corinthians. Whereas another believer in Corinth would say, no, that's not the line. And the person who thought it was the line is like, well, if you eat food sacrificed to idols, then you're bowing to the idol, which I won't do because my convictions make it that's. And Paul's whole solution was, don't fight over it. Do what's in your conscience and be free. And don't judge each other based on how you handle that particular situation. But what do you do if it's Shadrach? Like the text puts out that those three guys were correct. And anyone who bowed was incorrect. So how can we know? And it gets even more complicated. I told this story a couple weeks ago about Naaman from 2 Kings. This is a guy from Damascus, from Syria, who's not an Israelite. He has raided the northern kingdom and taken people back to Syria with him, including a servant girl. He has leprosy. The servant girl's like, oh, you should go see Elisha because he's good at healing. And so Naaman's like, oh, okay, I'll go find that guy. He finds Elisha. Elisha says, jump in the Jordan River 7 times and you'll be healed. And there's such great stuff in that story that I love to teach on. Like, what must Naaman have been thinking, like, after the third dip? Like, well, nothing's happening. He did say 7, but why 7? Why not 3? Why not 4? This is dumb. But of course, through faith, he went through all 7 and he came out healed. But then he goes to Elisha and he's like, when I go back to Damascus, my king is going to make me go in and worship his God with him. He's going to lean on me when he bows. What do I do? And Elisha says, go in peace. Essentially, don't worry about it. That's not you worshiping a false god. So Naaman has the freedom to go into whatever temple this is and go through the exercises. And God is saying, I know that's not really what you're worshiping. Or similarly, the tablecloth that Peter sees, I think I've talked about these in breakdowns, but it's worth kind of recapping. Where God is saying, go eat with the Gentiles. It's against what you think is right and wrong, but I've decided that this is not unclean. You need to go and be with them because I'm sending you to them. So don't make these obstacles. But Peter had plenty of reasons not to violate kosher laws, primary being he thought that was being obedient. Or the Sabbath principles that the Pharisees locked in after they returned from Babylon. There's a passage that says they went into captivity. I think this is in Chronicles because they had violated the Sabbath. So when they come back from captivity, they're not getting that wrong again. They're tightening that up. So a lot of times, my point being, what we think should be a stand up and don't bow issue, we see in scripture that even God himself is saying, don't worry about it. But somebody else might say, no, I can't do that. That violates my conscience. And elsewhere in scripture says that's okay. What do you do with all this data and this information and these thoughts? I'll give you one more. I mentioned the pinch of incense to Caesar as a god. That was a major thing in the first few centuries AD. And then a lot of Christians went to the lions and went to crucifixions because they refused to do that. But you know what? Some Christians did it. Maybe to save their skin, maybe out of a sense of they know that no one else believes this. So if they're just going to go through the motions and not mean it, I'm going to go through the motions and not mean it. But here's the thing. A lot of those people wanted to be back in Christian fellowship the next day or the next year or whatever. What does the church do with these people who gave the pinch of incense to Caesar while their other brothers and sisters are being mauled by lions? Do you welcome them back into the fellowship because they bowed in that sense? What do you do with that? And it created huge controversies in the early church. The first one, I believe, is called Novatism, something along those lines, because there's a guy, Novatus, I don't remember his real name, full name correctly. But anyway, and he was like, no, they don't get back in. No, we're holding the line. They have lapsed, and they did not proclaim Jesus in front of men. So Jesus is not going to proclaim them in front of the Father. And so they're out. They're just done. You don't get back in to the fellowship. You don't get to have communion with us. You don't get to be a part of any of our worship stuff. Whereas other people were like, well, they repented. Or maybe they didn't bow in their hearts. They just did this for other reasons. And all the reasons I have explained already, those were all on the table. People were thinking through this. What do you do? Later on in the 400s, 300s, there's a guy named Donatus, and he was the same way. He's like, hardline, no, we're not going to do this. And in particular, then it was priests and leaders who had offered the pinch of incense. And what do you do if those were the ones who baptized you? Or, and this is early on in kind of the Catholic sacramental system where, if they baptized you, that belief was they put some level of saving grace upon you. If they shared a sacrament with you, like communion, they are passing on the grace of God to you. Well, what if it's one of those leaders that then lapsed? Do you have to be rebaptized? I mean, it seems like I don't know, it kind of seems weird, but again, in our day and age, I kind of get it, that these were massive controversies. And you can look them up, and this idea of, or how about this, World War II, you got a guy like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, great Christian writer, great Christian thinker. He's involved in a plot to kill Hitler, and he gets put to death. He's a martyr for the faith. Okay, great. What a great story. What about all the German pastors who weren't Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Did they lapse? When do you know it's right to stand up, and when do you know it's okay to bow? I'm not sure it's always that cut and dry. And so I was wrestling with that big time. Because as a kid, I always thought, well, of course it's cut and dry. You just stand up for Jesus. And like I said in my opening, in a lot of ways, I'm really proud of that in my youth. And I want other people to have that sense of confidence and strength to stand up. But I also think about how much damage I did because I stood for dumb things too. And that legalism and that Phariseeism, it's hard to avoid. It seeps in real fast. And I think some of those pastors that just want to cut everything down to the same level with the same sword, I have a real problem with that. I think it's got to be more nuanced than that. Now, I have strong feelings that I don't think masks really measure up to a Nebuchadnezzar statue. I really don't. But can I say what is or isn't for somebody else? at the end of the day, it came down for me to be gun to my head, deny Jesus is God, or we'll kill you. That I'm comfortable with. That I know what I would do. I would say, I can't do that. Do what you will. And obviously for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this is already a pagan king who's already done all these things against God, who's already had his issues as a tyrant and an insecure leader. And then clearly he's forcing them to basically disobey the very first commandment, commandment 1. It's cut and dry for them. And I would think if I were in their shoes in that point in history, I would hope that I would recognize it was cut and dry for me too. And maybe that's the sermon. This is a singular moment in history. There aren't metaphorical statues. And I even said at the beginning of the series, I was not going to say, what are the lions in your life? What are the vegetables in your life? Like, this is not meant to be taken as metaphor for, like bad biblical interpretation. There's only one Goliath. We all don't have a Goliath. For David, it was a giant Philistine who wanted to kill him. That was his Goliath because that's who Goliath was. I don't have Goliaths in my life. That's not how the Bible teaching works. So I guess I kind of violated that when I said, what is the statue today? But at the same time, we do see in Scripture that Babylon is treated as a representative of the kingdoms of the world. So I'm not metaphoricalizing the text to ask the question, because I think even as we go through prophecy in the book of Revelation, this is a theme that we as the people of God need to be on the lookout for. So I think it is okay to say, where am I seeing some parallels here? And there certainly are parallels throughout all of human history where tyrants and, what did I call them in the sermon notes? Opportunistic tattletales who love to get triggered and rage against things so that they can sway the tyrant to do what they want. That's historical cycle. And we're in a version of that right now. So I don't think it's a stretch to ask the question, do we feel anything like this in our day and age? So that's all the setup of why this is difficult. I can't believe I've been at this 20 minutes already, but I'm going to finish with this thought, because what got me through as I was thinking about this and losing sleep over it was this realization. There are Christians who did not give the pinch of incense. There are Christians who went to the lions, or in our day, they got captured by ISIS, or I can't remember the name of the one that was in Nigeria. But those militant teams of Muslims that would capture Christians and behead them on camera and all this kind of horrible, horrible stuff. Or we heard a story when my friend Ron was here, who serves in the Ukraine, of a Ukrainian pastor who was captured by the Russians during this current mess and beaten up and lied about. And when I think of those people, again, I don't know what I would do. I hope I know what I would do. But when I think about historically the people who did not give the pinch of incense, I think we dishonor them and their memory if we make the statue something silly and temporary. I think we dishonor the Stevens of the world, the Jim Elliots of the world, who was a martyr when I was a kid. A very famous man got killed trying to reach a tribe in South America. I think we dishonor those people when we make the statue masks, or the Second Amendment, or, I love the Bill of Rights, but the loss of perceived rights, or even real rights and freedoms, because we're having a particular controversy in our nation during this season of human history. Like, those things are important, but I don't think they're this. I don't think they're Shadrach statue moment. I think they're important and we should think through them, But that's why I hit the pause button when I did in the sermon, because I wanted us to just stop and think again of what the real martyrdom looks like, what the real standing up for Jesus looks like and has looked like throughout human history. And it has the American political system, wherever it is and wherever it's going, is just not that. And we need to be careful about that. At the same time, you can kind of smell it coming. And that's why I thought I need to at least say something where I would draw the line. And again, I wasn't trying to call for everybody to have to draw the line in this. Maybe I will someday. But for me, it is that the emperor has no clothes. You keep wanting me to say it, but I can't say it. And it's interesting for me because I know people, and I'm 1 degree removed from a lot of people who buy into the transgender issue, or even are. I have a very good friend, and his son is currently transitioning, and it's a hard solution. How do you handle this? How do you speak to it? And for me, I have unlimited, or hopefully as close to unlimited as possible, compassion and love. And I want to get to know these people, and I want to understand better. I want to see life from their perspective as best as I can. But I also have a literature degree, and I specialize in text, understanding and interpreting language. And so for me, pronouns are pronouns are pronouns. I know how language works. I've studied how language works. And it's kind of like when Nebuchadnezzar points to that statue and says, "That's a god, worship it." And Shadrach's like, "It's just not. I can't." No, just say it is. He's like, I can't, because it isn't. I can't call that something that I know it isn't. That would violate not only the first commandment, which is the most important thing, but also just my ability to tell the truth and speak with any sense of integrity. I'd be lying against myself and how things work to call that statue a god. And so for me, that line, when it comes to this gender thing, it actually happens with the language, because that's just not how language works. And I can't say 2 + 2 = 5, and I can't say him and her are the same thing, because that's not how language works. And that's not how gender works. And I know that from Genesis 1. And that's not how science works. And I'm a huge science-loving Christian. And so you put all this together, and it's like, okay, that's my line. And I felt like I needed to say that in the sermon. And maybe there is a day where that becomes something we have to stand firm on as an entire church. Maybe that day's already here and I'm just slow. But I want to say all this so that you understand what kind of went into the thinking behind Daniel 3, why it was so difficult. Not that I'm scared of any of these issues. But like I said before, when we were doing this conversation a little bit before, the danger, or I think a danger, is making this all about a principle or a philosophy or a moral without understanding where the people fall in all this. So, like, is abortion bad? Yes. Would you bow to a statue of a pro-abortion? No. But you know what? On any given Sunday, you know how many women in that room in our worship center have had an abortion? I don't know the exact number, but I know it's not 0. So when Jesus shows up and he starts hanging out with the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the sinners, he was accused of, well, don't you know they're sinners? Don't you know that that's a statue we don't bow to? Don't you know that that's a line we don't cross? And of course Jesus knows what's right and wrong. Of course Jesus knows where the idols are in a culture, but he loved the people. And I don't ever want to lose sight of that. And I know I get a lot of compliments when I get really strong rhetoric on social issues. People love that. And I understand that. I like to hear people get excited about stuff that I believe in. I just don't ever want to cross the line and say, this is right, this is wrong, when it is. I mean, I'm not afraid to cross that line to say right is right and wrong is wrong. But I always want to do it in a way that remembers there are people at stake. And we need to always be compassionate and speak the truth, but speak the truth in love. And I think a lot of times on this particular issue, the Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, where do you draw the line in the sand? There's so many Christians who forget the love part of that. They're just so concerned about drawing the line. And fair enough, there are Christians on the other side who forget the truth of it. And they just want to speak in love, but they forget to tell the truth. And I'm always going to do my best to ride that unicycle on the tightrope while I juggle over a pit of fire. I'm not sure which side I'd prefer to err on. I don't want to err on either side. But I don't feel like my job is to rally the troops back into battleship mode. And so, hence, the tone I tried to take on Sunday and the tone I've tried to take in this video. So I'm not sure if I have a closing point on this. Oh, I do have a closing point on it, because I think the point of Daniel 3, even after all of this, isn't what is the statue in our day. And it certainly isn't God will always rescue you from the fire. I think the point is, who's the fourth man? Who's the guy in the furnace? Who's the one who supports us when we don't know what to say during times of controversy? In fact, that was one of the concerns the apostles had. And Jesus said, with my spirit, you don't have to worry about what you're going to say when you're brought before authorities who want to do you harm. The Spirit will give you what you need in that time. And that's a nice reminder. That's a good thought, that I don't have to have all the answers, and I don't have to have all the hypotheticals figured out, what I would do or what I wouldn't do, or what I would say or what I wouldn't say, or would I bow to this or not that. Because sometimes I'm told, if you bow for this, you will always bow for that. It's a slippery slope. You got to draw the line now, because before it gets that, I don't know if that's true. I think I'm a pretty thoughtful person, and I can tell the difference between this and this. Just because I don't agree with you on this doesn't mean I won't agree with you later. Just because your conscience has you draw the line here, but I'm going to draw it over here, doesn't mean we're at odds. But I think we do need to hold in a very closed fist the issues of first importance. Jesus is God. We need him to save us. Salvation is by faith, not by works. He is coming again. Sound doctrine passed on from the beginning. The matters of first importance, that Jesus did rise from the dead, and so will we. Like those things, I'm not bowing the knee to anybody who wants me to deny any of those things. So I want to encourage you with that should it come to that, I'll stand right there with you, next to you, and I'll try and help you stand if you'll try to help me stand too. So we're all in this together. But right now the mission is clear, which is to be a blessing in the world. And when the king makes it an issue, then we stand for God, not the king. What is that issue? That's probably between you and the Lord. But anyway, enough about that. One of the things I want to point out, I'm really excited for this week, and I mentioned this last week, this chiastic structure of the book of Daniel, at least chapters 2 through 7. If you don't remember what a chiasm is, I'll remind you. It's a Hebrew an ancient Near East way of organizing thoughts, where there's a parallelism. It's kind of like you go up the ladder and then you come down the ladder. In the ideas, they match on each side, and there's a pivot point, which is the real point of the whole thing. And Daniel 2 through 7 is a chiasm. Daniel 2 is a dream of kingdoms. Daniel 7 is a dream of kingdoms. Daniel 3 is the fiery furnace where God's people they're miraculously saved from punishment. Daniel 6 is the lion's den. Daniel 4, which we're going to study this week, is Nebuchadnezzar loses his kingdom. Daniel 5 is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, Belshazzar, loses his kingdom. So you have this dream, punishment, king loses kingdom, punishment, dream. Okay? That's how a chiasm works. So the point is, what's at the top? What's at the top, we're going to talk about this Sunday. It's going to be awesome. And it is Nebuchadnezzar's praise of God. So as we've been going, chapters 1 through 4 are all about Nebuchadnezzar versus God. Daniel and his friends are kind of ancillary characters through it, but it's really God and Nebuchadnezzar having this out. And at the end of chapter 4, we get the climax of Nebuchadnezzar bowing the knee. And what he has to say about who God is the point of this whole chunk of scripture that we're dealing with over 6 weeks. So you'll want to make sure you're here for that. I can't wait. We're going to be really enjoying, I think, corporate worship after we talk about this key point in Daniel. And then 8 through 12, we're going to deal with angels and prophecies and all that kind of crazy stuff. So these Tuesday breakdowns, they're going to get really interesting if today wasn't interesting enough. So thanks for everybody's support. I heard great things from people about the sermon as I tried to thread the needle. If I didn't, to your satisfaction, I apologize, but these breakdowns are so that you can kind of grasp or get a sense of what goes into them from my perspective. I want to be bold for Jesus, and I want to stand for his gospel, and hopefully I always will. But let's not be distracted and dishonor those that came before by picking fights over things that aren't the gospel. I guess that would be my summary of Daniel 3, what I hope to do, because Jesus is with us always. And there you go. All right, it's 31 minutes into this. Thank you all who are watching. I see a handful of you around now. Sorry I didn't get to more questions, but Daniel's just a hefty book, and it might take a full sermon and a half hour just to get past maybe scratching the surface. Anyway, come back this Sunday. It's going to be awesome. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. If you're watching now, thank you. You are awesome, and I appreciate it very much. If you're watching later, you are also awesome, and I appreciate that very much. And if you never watch it, you are made in God's image and awesome, and I hope somebody tells you to be a blessing to you. Thanks.